please? All right, thank you. So today I sent out the email and kind of gave everyone a chance to choose the topics. And so we're just going to discuss about, to ask everyone to consider sharing their own life experience as well as what they've learned in the class about human resource management. And so I'm just going to go from the bottom and on how you appear on my screen, just kind of ask about your own experience. So how do you think it would impact the workplace and stuff like that? So how do you think or divorce and family issues would like affect the workplace, Brianna?
So this was actually my topic. Am I just supposed to share what I came up with, or is this just like a kind of general?
I think it's just kind of a general and share, like, because it just says when everyone's ready, ask the first person to tell about the topics and experiences they've chosen. And after the first person tells about their own experience and how they think it would impact the workplace, I just will ask everyone else if they agree and have they seen similar issues and if they're planning and stuff like that.
Okay, so I'm supposed to give like what I came up with then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. So I chose divorce because my sister just went through a pretty bad divorce, and I could definitely see how it affected her work and pretty much her life in general. So I found a few different articles that I wanted to share. So divorce in one way can become a very stressful element in the work environment. When somebody's going through a divorce, they have to do a lot of hard things like finding a lawyer to get everything settled if it's really messy or if they're involved, and stress that that person is holding themselves will go into the workplace no matter how hard they try. It ends up happening. And so that's something that I definitely saw with my sister. She lives in a different state than I do. So I could hear it, I could see like how she was changing, and it was hard to see. But one thing that I think is important in the work environment is to realize that the stress that they are holding is not really like they can't, how do you say that in English? Sorry, I'm thinking in Spanish today. They can't really control it. It's something that's out of their control, and if you're in that situation of being in that work environment with them, you should just be kind of understanding, not really saying that you've been through that kind of stuff, but just realizing that they're kind of going through a hard time. The next point that I came up with was that they would be distracted and possibly be inefficient in their work, with all the emotional factors that are involved with a divorce. Your mind can be taken in other places. They're probably thinking of everything else but work while they're at work, trying to figure out exactly what they need to do with their lives. And so that might be another bad side effect of divorce in the workplace. And then the third one is poor decision making. The individuals might make decisions. They can break careers. They could get fired. They could say something because they're very overwhelmed and staff. And it can be super distracting, obviously. This one is that while somebody's going to go through a divorce, they usually have to take out a lot of time off of work so that they can go to their court hearings or they can go get things settled. So yeah, that's kind of what I came up with the negative impacts of divorce. And then for my tips that we could do to kind of cope with the divorce if somebody's going through that, we should always be compassionate and supportive, but we shouldn't act as a problem solver because nobody really wants that. Let's see, always be a good listener, but don't be kind of their, how do you say that in English? I cannot think in English today, guys. Just, yeah, be a good listener. And then try and help the employee refocus on their work and on their lives, and just kind of let them know that they're here to work, and if they need to take time off or if they need, a leave of absence, that they should do that. But that's kind of what I came up with for divorce.
Awesome. Does everyone agree kind of what you said? And have you guys seen like similar issues like in the workplace with what she was talking about with the divorce?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I got divorced after 25 years. My husband and I both worked in the same industry, and I have just started back in the same company like yesterday. And yeah, I took 3 years off to just separate, even though he'd moved to another country. It was like, I just like, oh, I just didn't want those questions of, hey, what's he up to? Whereas now there's been enough time, enough turnover of people that they don't connect me with my ex-spouse. So I don't necessarily know if I agree with that. Oh, what do you want to talk to our assisted whatever program? I'm thinking if people said that to me, I would have went, get stuffed. It's too impersonal. But, that was what Bree said hit the nail on the head. It's a crappy time, no matter what. So, and you're so consumed with everything in your personal life, your work life is shot.
Thank you for sharing that. And then we'll go to Chad next if anyone didn't have anything else to say. And he had the work-home imbalance.
Okay, so I personally had I've gone through this a couple times in my life. I have 4 children, and so and my wife and us, we kind of had there. I was at work. When we first got married, I couldn't find a job, and so I was looking around, and I finally found one, and worked there for a few years, 2 to 3 years, and then we had our first child, and then I was going to school too, so I had school, and then I had work, and then I went and got another job on top of after I got out of school, and so I had 2 jobs, and I just had our first baby, and it was really difficult to balance life with work and being able to be home with my daughter and to be home with my wife, just kind of trying to find ways to just balance it. It was really difficult. And I mean, it still is. It's not easy because now I'm looking for work, and then I'm also going to school full time and finishing up and stuff. And I still find it hard to find time with my family and whatnot. And those are kind of my own life experiences and everything. And I think the kind of issue and impact it has in the workplace is that you have a family at home, you have responsibilities of being a father or even being a mother or a wife and a husband and stuff. And, it impacts the workplace because you have things that happen at home that that can negatively impact you at work. You know, it's kind of hard to balance them and whatnot. I think the issues that kind of come up in your home life, and it's almost kind of like what Bree said about divorce and stuff. That's kind of like a heavy subject to talk about with divorce and stuff. And I've also seen that impact in the work life with some friends of mine, some close friends that went through divorces and stuff like that. So that's a bad thing. That can be horrible when you have older children. My children are getting older and stuff. They're getting into sports and they're getting into activities that I would like to be there for. And sometimes you just can't. You can't be there for everything, and so you have to learn to balance it. Now, going on to the second question, how would you address the issue in the workplace? I found an article on Forbes magazine.com or whatever it is, or Forbes.com, and it talks about 8 ways to achieve a better work-life balance, with your family and with at home. So basically, there's the titles they give are: you learn your employer's policies, learn if they have a flex time policy. Maybe kind of like the article we read about. talking about flex time and working from home and stuff, and see if that's a possibility for you to do that if that's in your line of work. Communication is important to make sure that you, with your manager, your colleagues, know what kind of support you can get from them. So that you could switch hours with people, or switch weekends or something, just to kind of accommodate the issues of being a father or a mother or a husband and wife. Of course, there's telecommunication, so you could free up some value hours. Being like says you'll be able to focus on work for long stretches at a time and use the extra hours to meet personal responsibilities. So you could kind of go that way. Sometimes learn to say no. That's kind of important. So say you had a manager or you had an employee come up to you and say, hey, you know what, I really need to do this for me. There's sometimes you got to find ways to say, you got to say no sometimes. They can't generally keep you there as like for overtime and stuff like that. There was other things too, like fight the guilt thing, the whole, Wonder Woman or Superman thing, those are fictional characters. We're real people. We can't always devote 100% of everything that we do to our work. We need to, and even to our families though, because if you have to miss something once in a while, it's okay. It'll be okay. Like in the end. So I think just being able to find ways to balance the work home life. That's kind of what I came up with. So
That's good. Does anyone else have like anything they want to add and agree with? Because like I agree with Chad. My dad, he started his own business. Like he used to work for his family business and often started his own. And so I remember as a kid trying to watch him do the work home and balance and wanting to spend enough time with us and feeling guilty because he had to travel a lot. So he started actually doing as a kid, as we were lucky enough to be able to like go on to the trips and work with him. And so that's how he tried to find balance, which I'm like really glad for because I got a lot of good work experience. But does anyone else have anything they want to add? Great.
So I am a full-time student. I work full-time and I have a part-time job. And sometimes I feel like very overwhelmed because I'll work like 45 to 50 hours a week. But I definitely agree with Chad says, communicate with your bosses. Like if you had a really late night, like I did last night, I told my boss and I let him know, hey, I might be a little bit slower today and I'm sorry about that, but I'll pick up my slack, once I can. And I don't know, just thinking of different ways that you can work as well. Like I work in a town that's 30 miles, one of my jobs is 30 miles away from me. And so one thing that I've come up with my boss is that, so a little bit more backstory. So I work for an appraiser and I write 80-page reports for him about different commercial buildings and houses and all this other jazz. So I found out ways that I can work from home as well to do my research and to write so that I can kind of be home more with my husband since we don't really see each other that often, but as well get all of the work that I need to. And then I can still go into the office the days that he needs me there so that we can go through reports together. But definitely just like communicating, like knowing your boundaries and what you can do and just kind of, I don't know, having a relaxing day as well sometimes just to take time for yourself, I feel like is really important to get that work home life balance out right.
I agree with you 100%. And Karina, do you want to share about substance abuse?
Yes, let me get myself off mute. And I got a brand new computer, so I'm a little bit all over the place. Okay, so what's really interesting with the whole substance abuse is that now that marijuana is legalized in several states, I think the majority of states now, when you go for a drug test, a lot of companies like banks, I know Target, they all make you go for a drug test before you actually start to work. So what's really interesting now is technically it's not illegal, for example, in Seattle, Washington, to have marijuana in your system, but it still could stop a company from employing you because, let's say, for example, Target is a global, a national company and their policy is XYZ. So basically, I don't have any personal stories or situations where I've ever known anyone at work to have a drug or alcohol problem, but the employees suffer themselves because they have poor work performance, and this can cause them to get poor reviews. They can arrive late, they're a little bit unreliable, frequently change where they work, struggle with productivity, and they may file for workers' compensation claims and benefits. And so the prevention is, implementing an effective workplace drug program and really dealing with it before the hiring process. And then, if you work in, let's say, a factory with machinery, then there needs to be an effective workplace drug program to make sure that people aren't, dealing with heavy machinery while they're on drugs of some sort, whether that's a little bit of weed or a lot of heroin or a lot of alcohol. It doesn't really matter. You don't want them to be impaired. But what was really interesting through the reading this week is that there's quite a large percentage, I think it was like 68% of those who have a drug addiction problem actually are employed. Now, I don't know exactly what that employment looks like, but that was the statistics that we were given. The other thing is that if companies implement this drug testing and educational programs, it can boost morale, it can decrease accidents, reduce employee theft, increase the productivity, and reduce the turnover of employees and the cost of insurance as work and compensation. I think what's really hard for a company is you might put in this program to have drug testing, and then someone starts working with you. They may have worked with you for 10, 20 years, and because of divorce or a poor work-life balance or whatever it may be, then let's say they might develop that abuse after they've already been working for the company for a long time. And I think that would be really tricky. One of the things that in our reading it talks about is how to know if someone is abusing drugs. And for me, just the most noticeable thing is the dilation of the pupils. If I'm talking to two people in a room, so the lighting is the same for both people. You'll see one person's, their pupils are dilated pretty normally, but the person who's just gone out and had a bit of a joint in their lunch hour, their pupils are really, apart from the fact it stinks, but their pupils take up the majority of their eye, which is really interesting. And then you have the issue of what do you do if you notice that? As I said, I don't have any personal experience. So I'll be interested to hear if any of you guys have any experience with such a problem at work where you've had to go in and say, look, Fred, Joan, whoever has a substance abuse problem, and this is what we need to do about it. Does anyone have any personal experience?
I don't have personal experience with work. I actually have one of my brothers he relapsed, but he's like back on the train again. But it's really interesting because it's very known now, but he was a meth addict, and it's interesting just to see, like, I don't know how to say it, but just their work ethic, because like they steal so much and you can't trust them. Like, I didn't see him for a while, I saw him once in, like, not this past July, but the July of 2016, and I didn't see him till December of, like, 2016 around Christmas. And just the difference, how much they change, you can't trust them at all. They lie through their teeth, like, and it just becomes, like, a lot worse. And so a lot of them actually can't hold jobs once they get to a certain point because it overtakes their whole life. And especially meth, it really jacks up their brain. And, like, he literally thought the NSA was, like, following him, and the CIA, like, we laugh about it now because and he's like embarrassed and he has apologized, but like we laugh about now. But yeah, like you can't trust anything they say. You just have to take if you know they're a drug addict, you just have to take everything they say with a grain of salt because you don't know if it's true or not. And so I don't have personal experience with work, but like luckily where he lives, they have a great program where he got in some legal trouble and had to go to jail. But Salvation Army has a like thing up there where when they come out of jail, it's kind of like a sobriety house, but they have to stay out there and they work for the Salvation Army and they have drug tests and everything. So I'm like really grateful for that because it got him sober and he lived there for 6 months and he had a job. And there's a lot of rules for like the first 3 months they couldn't leave the place. And then after like a month or two, they could leave with a buddy. And then after another like few more months, like they could go out by themselves with like a family member. And so like I'm really grateful for that. And like I feel like that type of situation was great because we always knew where he was because there's times where we didn't know where he was for weeks and would find out some random person where he was. So that's my experience. I don't have work experience. So it's like a family.
Yeah, and I'm the same. I have a son who is a recovering cocaine addict, and so but I didn't have any firsthand work experience with anyone. And what was really interesting, Nicholas really enjoyed a job that he had. He was basically in a set of apartment complexes, and if someone's washing machine wasn't working, he would go in and fix the washing machine. And he really actually enjoyed the job. And then I don't know what happened. He was on a bender or whatever. And he decided to sleep in an empty apartment. He just slept on the floor in an empty apartment and of course lost his job. And you're like, it's the mental ability, risk versus reward, where normal people, we would think, oh, why would I risk my job because I get to sleep on a concrete floor with a bit of carpet for the night? It doesn't make sense. But to the addict mind, for some reason, the risk reward doesn't compute. Richard, you wanted to say something.
Oh, well, I've been on both ends of the employment aspect of it. I've been a store manager hiring, and I had an employee come for an interview, seemed like a really great guy. He had tattoos. Company's policy was no tattoos. Talked to the company owner, said, he's really nice. I feel like he'd be able to cover up the tattoos and everything. I think it would work. They agreed to that. They said he just needs to pass the drug test, so I sent him off for a drug test. 2 hours later, I'm wondering where he is. I send my other employee out to go to the drug testing place to find him. Comes back with him, and he says, I can't take the employment. I wouldn't pass the drug test. So as much as it seems like a silly idea to have a drug test there, you don't know necessarily. I've experienced it. They can walk in and you might not even know that they're using or have used soon enough that they wouldn't pass. I've also experienced where I'm at in production where essentially there's been a couple guys that have been let go for alcohol abuse. And essentially the problem with that is in production, you have a lot of safety hazards. The biggest one that occurred was I was running the CNC laser and not just your simple desktop laser, for home. This takes up a whole bedroom kind of laser. And the maintenance guy went up to do some maintenance on top of it. And someone I work with was right next to him and smelled alcohol in his breath. And he went up without the safety glasses on to protect his eyes. And that got reported and he was let go. So I've experienced both ends of it, and it's not fun, but at the same time, companies have to protect themselves.
I'll hand the time back over to you, Melissa.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So the next one is Leslie. It's about workplace dating and relationships.
Okay, I don't have any experience with the workplace dating part of it, but my neighbor is actually the head IT guy at the hospital in our area. So I went over, happened to be visiting last night, and I was telling him about this. So he told me about situations in the hospital there, and I wasn't really aware. He said hospitals are kind of like a cesspool for this kind of thing because they spend so much time together and it's kind of intimate time. So he told me about their workplace dating policy, and that their policy is that you, as superior, cannot date someone lower than them. They're very what is the word that I want to, they're okay with people dating. They're definitely okay with people dating. But he said the policies are very strict because they've had really serious issues with affairs happening in the workplace, and then the affair goes bad, you know, something happens, and then it gets brought into the workplace and makes it a very toxic environment for everyone to work in. And so he just said as an HR individual, you would definitely need to have a good policy on the dating aspect of it, and make sure that you cover all your bases in those aspects, and that people are very aware of what your expectation is when they come into work. And then also for the relationships part of it, just one experience that I've had with my husband's family, we're not exactly a part of it, but his family owns a company together, and most of them live in Missouri. So they all feel like they have ownership in this company. And when something goes wrong, they all have their opinion of what they think is right and what they think they should do. And they are constantly fighting with each other, constantly bad relationships. When the business doesn't do well, then their relationships are bad. And so on that aspect of it, that's the only way that I dealt with it in that way. And my opinion in that would be to bring in an outside person that can help you deal with those relationships and that aspect of it. But that was what I found on it.
Perfect. Does anyone else have anything they want to say or add?
I do on that one. I was the manager, chief financial officer, basically for a company, large electrical contractor. And so our ratio men to women in that company was probably 10 to 1. There was 10 men for every woman that worked there. And I managed the women because they were in the office, and there were all of the project managers and electrical contractors that came in and out of the office all of the time. And I had an employee that she was married, started an affair with one of the project managers in the company, and then created, her work performance suffered. She would lie all the time about where she was going. He would go out of town on a business trip, and she would call in sick conveniently those days that he was on this trip. And she thought she was being really sneaky, but it caused a really bad environment for the rest of us. We were all picking up her slack. And then she, because this guy was one of the vice presidents, felt like she was protected against any sort of, when she'd get written up or wouldn't do her work or whatever. And it became a really bad, toxic. I mean, several of the employees left because of her. And she ended up marrying him 3 years later after her divorce was final and everything. But, it really disrupted the entire company, and everybody was upset about it. And the biggest reason, I think, is that they weren't upfront about it. They weren't, obviously they were married, so they didn't really want to be too upfront about it. But, as her manager, I think she should have come to me and said, I'm getting a divorce and I'm in a relationship with this other guy that I'm working with, and just been honest and upfront, about what was going on. I wouldn't have gone to her husband or anything like that. That's not my place. But it would have saved a ton of misunderstandings and a lot of problems if she didn't feel like she had to lie to everybody in the company about what was going on. So that's my experience with it.
I've got one little experience which is sort of interesting because it ties church into it. So in Australia, our bishop worked for church officers, and so did half of our ward. And so a girlfriend of mine, I didn't know this, but she went to the bishop to confess she was having an affair. He, I don't know if by law or what, but because he was also her boss at work, she got fired because she was no longer able to hold a temple recommend. My girlfriend sued the church. It was on the news all the time because, you know, it was a big deal. And she kept coming to church every Sunday. So it's like, so she actually won because for whatever reason with Australian law, she went to her bishop in his capacity as bishop, not in her capacity as her manager. So she actually won the court case and she still comes to church. But yeah, it was like how to make your affair really public.
And then the last topic is both Misty and Richard. It's same-sex relationships. So.
Okay, so on this, I kind of had a couple of different thoughts about it. Obviously, when you're talking about a same-sex relationship, I think it falls under all of the things we just talked about with, you know, regular relationships that we're all used to seeing, even though this is, you know, kind of a new, well, not really new, but, you know, as far as the laws and stuff are concerned with providing benefits and things like that for spouses that in same-sex relationships, you know, and things like that. So I kind of thought about it that way. And I think that, you know, it falls under a lot of the same things like I said, we've been talking about relationships, but then there's also an added level, I guess, with discrimination, because there's a lot of people that discriminate against those types of relationships or the LGBT, you know, community and things like that. So I think there's a lot of issues there with it. And I think it would be, I kind of went back and forth on really what to talk about with it, because I think it's, like I said, covered under what we've talked about with other romantic relationships. But I think that you have to be more aware now of things, you know, where you didn't really think about it a lot before. If two women were on a business trip together or two men were on a business trip together, now those types of things, you know, can be more of an issue, or I guess, you know, it's become more obvious they can be an issue. I guess they've always been an issue, but just maybe not as publicized or talked about. But I don't know, Richard, what kind of thoughts did you have on it? Because I really kind of struggled with this, and most of what I looked up had to do with employers' benefits for domestic partners and things like that, not so much just the same-sex relationship and the effect on the workplace.
Well, I had the same issue. I was looking up stuff and it's mostly benefits, but I think another issue that I thought of because of my own personal experience is sexual harassment cases. Mm-hmm. It opens up another avenue for sexual harassment to occur. I had a manager when I was younger, straight out of high school, that was actually hired on at a restaurant that I worked at, and he was, you know, he was same-sex oriented, and it came out to me eventually that he was going around to every employee saying that I was gay and in the closet, which I'm not, obviously. And at that age, I just took it as kind of whatever, walked away from it. Eventually, he got fired from viewing porn on the company computer at the restaurant. And I've thought about it, years and years have gone past since, you know, 2002 is when this was happening. And I thought about it, and technically there would be grounds for a sexual harassment case in that situation. And that's a big issue for companies to deal with, is sexual harassment. And this then opens up that, I guess, that area of issue. How do you handle now someone that's in the same office with someone that of that orientation, you know, like a boss that's gay and then he meets with a male coworker or employee, you know, should they be allowed to do that without, it's the same situation for the opposite sex relationships. And so I thought that was an interesting point on it. But like you said, I think it's mostly benefits that people look at for the issue.
Yeah, I think that employers, a lot of employers now are, providing benefits. I don't think they cannot do it at this point, except for like where I work, because I do work for the church, the LDS church. Obviously we can discriminate against those types of things. We won't hire someone in that, if they are in a same-sex relationship, because we do have to be temple recommend holders to work for the church. So, I don't have a lot of experience with working in an environment where I would have, that kind of exposure. So that's basically all I can come up with, basically, is just the benefits issues. So.
All right, perfect. Does anyone else have anything to add on that? All right. And then, so the last part's the wrap up, and they wanted me to ask what other issues we could see in society that are likely to impact our workplaces in the future, and how do we think the workplace will change in the next 10 years? I thought about this one, and I actually thought about like the whole transgender, like multisexual things, like the being politically correct, because it's already becoming a problem now, and I can only see it like getting even worse, wanting people calling them. I have a friend who's like dating a them now, and I'm like, how's it a them? It's like a boy or a girl, and I can see that becoming like a huge problem in the future. And that's like what I thought of how that's going to be changing a lot in the future.
Well, I think another thing that's going to change a lot, and it's happening everywhere, is people telecommuting, the working outside of the office, being connected basically wherever you are, because I think that that's just happening a lot more. I mean, people don't have to be in an office to do the majority of their work anymore. I could come into my office one day a week and still accomplish all of my work. So, I think that's going to change a lot. I think there's going to be a lot less, I guess, FaceTime in offices, except for in situations where the employees have to be there, hands-on production, assembly line. Of course, even that's going electronic, a lot of it, but as far as computers and robots and stuff. But I think it's gonna happen a lot.
Kind of going off what you were saying, Melissa, the different sexes and people, I think that with the new era coming on, that there's going to be a lot of new policies as well, and that we just kind of need to realize, like, we need to respect everyone and they need to respect us as well. But those new policies are going to be able to lay out everything that the company kind of needs from that person they're hiring on and what they expect of them. And so I think that that's going to be the one benefit of this new world. Like, everything always changes, and we can never expect it to stop changing. And so if we're just ready for the changes that are coming, and if we're willing to work with that and have them work with us, then, it should be fine. And if not, the policies were not followed, so we'll just fire them. But that's kind of what I see as well.
Does anyone else have anything they want to say? No. All right, well, that's all I have. So Karina said she agreed with the whole transgender remote thing. She had to leave to go to a meeting. But I don't know if we want to talk about the doohickeys and stop recording so we can talk about it real quick.